Okay, so if you haven't opened Substance Painter by now, let's go ahead and open it. Seeing some slackers on the right side. Open it up. Substance Painter. So, to actually load in a mesh into here to start painting it, mine is going to look slightly different from yours. As I'm seeing, like Dana, your shelf, you can actually move that down. Or under the window. There you go. Okay, that should be good. Yes. Just hit, just X out of those. Yeah. Just close those windows. Close those windows. It's fine. Yeah. It won't bite. Don't worry. It's all bark. But you actually can make it here. Okay. So, what we are going to do, make sure our Substance Painter is open. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to load up the RuneGlaive first. We'll try to generate that first because we're going to walk through how to do each of these for two different types of scenarios, for your sci-fi game or for your fantasy game. Obviously, only two types of games ever. We're going to create a new file. Well, yeah, you know, well, you get there's always Kickstarter. Yeah. Once you have created set a new project, it'll ask you to select a template. I don't know why Dota 2's on there, but anyway, we're going to choose PBR Metallic Roughness, in parentheses, Allegorithmic. Allegorithmic is the name of the company. So we select that.
So which of these are pulling just the RuneGlaive mesh in?
Yeah, that's where we're gonna. This is where we're gonna load it under the mesh. Select right here.
High poly or low poly?
Low poly. So we're loading in the one that we actually want to paint on because remember, that particular mesh has our actual UV information. That actually has texture coordinates that we're gonna bake everything down onto. So we select that mesh. So wherever you put it, try to find it. So if you need to, check your classes. Let me open it up and look at it. So we'll have two of them. One is called just RuneGlaive Mesh.fex. One is called RuneGlaive Mesh _ high poly. We want to load in the low poly first. This is the one that we're actually going to be painting on. This is our main object. So, not the high poly, the low poly. The one that's like 91 kilobytes. Super tiny. So we'll click on that. Right now, we don't have any additional maps. Usually, I would bring in baked maps from like XNormal that I've baked down my ambient occlusion and my normal maps. But I don't want to use XNormal. I'm going to bake all my stuff in Substance. I know, it's super cool. So your document resolution, it's at 1024 right now. I'm just going to bump it up to 2K, 2048 by 2048. But it can be changed later without loss. So think about that. You've created a Photoshop document and try to scale it back up, right? And you lost all that resolution, or it's like crunchy and like pixelated. Guess what? Substance Painter is non-destructive, varying size workflows. So you can work at a smaller resolution, export textures at a much higher resolution with no loss in quality. So it's awesome. So we don't need additional texture maps, so I'm going to hit OK. Okay. So this is what the view kind of looks like. I had moved some of my windows around just for my workflow. So the main things that we're looking at are the 3D view and the 2D view. So the 3D view is your actual object. your actual 3D object in 3D space. Controls work pretty much like Maya. Alt left click, Alt right click, Alt middle mouse. It's Maya controls for the most part in the 3D view and also in the 2D view. Oop. Okay. So you also have a shelf with various different types of alphas, grunge maps, procedurals, textures, hard surfaces, materials, all that stuff that we're going to go through. We have, well, that's our shelf here. Oh, I see some people wanted to get a tablet.
Yeah, I left mine. I didn't know we were going to start on the painting part.
Yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about this is if you don't want to paint, you don't have to.
I want to.
Well, it doesn't necessarily require... I got it. I'll go put it away. It does not require necessarily a tablet. All right. So I may want to start painting on this, but it, you know, instinct tells me there's an empty layer. I want to paint on it, right? Well, I'll just create a new layer. Add a layer. And start painting onto my surface here. So I can actually paint directly on my 3D model, which is cool. I can, you know, turn on symmetry up here over the x-axis or whichever axis that I switch it to. And I can change which mirroring direction it goes in. Yeah, they're not great. Let's turn off mirroring. I can change my base color under my properties in my paint. I can change my height information, change my roughness. So let's just go ahead and change this to a red color. Paint onto the surface and see what it looks like. It's a pretty generic color. If I change my height, bump it all the way up, it adds on top of it. I can actually paint on the idea of, or like a height map. So it looks like it's actually protruding from the surface. If I turn it negative, I can look like I'm cutting back into it. If I turn on, or put this back to value of 0, you can use the icon next to it, the little pin icon, to change the actual value. For our roughness, right now it's painting at a value of like 0.3. If I turn up my roughness all the way up and paint, it will be a smooth surface, or it won't be high, it won't be reflective or glossy at all. If I turn it all the way down, then it's a bit shinier. If I turn up my metallic and paint now, it's highly reflective. It's like car paint, right? Like glass almost. And if I turn my metallic all the way down, still metallic. Very flat metallic. Yeah, or actually, no, it's not metallic at all. It's this like very bright plastic. So again, I turn my roughness up. It's non-metal surface. So beautiful, right? Okay. Perfect. So that's a paint layer, which we can use a paint layer. That's fine. We could. But the beauty of Substance Painter comes into fill layers. But in order to get that rolling properly and actually use Substance Painter to our full advantage, I'm going to have to bake my maps down. So let me go ahead and delete this layer. I can right-click, delete a layer, or cut layer, delete layer, or whatever. Or just hit delete in my keyboard. There we go. All right. So layer 1 still there, pretty much everything intact. I have my layers palette here. I have my properties here. Yours may be slightly different from mine, but I also have my texture set settings. I had moved mine over, but you're looking for the name texture set settings of your window. So yours is going to be kind of in this area right here. So our texture set settings are where we actually have our different channels. So currently I have my base color, my height, my roughness, my metallic, and my normal. So these are the channels that I can actually directly paint on. Now, this is where you could select a normal map, select a world space normal map, ID map, ambient occlusion map, curvature map, position map, thickness map. All of this stuff here is stuff that you could load in, stuff that you bake in X normal, or we're going to actually bake it in from Substance Painter. But first, let's talk about what is an ID map. So an ID map allows us to define different areas of the geometry, or stuff that I want to paint on independently of one another. Now, where might this be useful? If I have sections such as the blade that I want to keep separate completely from the cloth, from the wood. So an ID map helps me define those areas, but what would that look like? Well, or how would I generate it? So if I look, and I'm just going to show you guys what your high poly will look like. Color ID, there we go. So this is my high poly geometry. This is 734,000 triangles. This is generated from ZBrush. So what I did was, you guys remember polygroups?
Yeah.
Kinda. Would it help if I show you?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So let's go back to ZBrush. Let's open up the thing. Okay. All right. So apparently I'd also tried to paint some of this stuff myself in ZBrush. Let's turn this off. Control N. Okay. Yeah. So let me, for purposes of this demonstration, let me duplicate this, hide this, and fill this completely in with a single color. So, color, fill object with this generic matte cap gray color. Okay. And I'm going to go to my polygroups and group visible. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so I've sculpted out my high poly version of it, but what I need to do is actually define polygroups for this. So I can assign very bright and loud colors to each of these sections. So the way that I would do that is I would mask out areas that I need to do first. So if I hold down Control, it brings up my mask icon here, so I can create a large selection by dragging a rectangle over it, and then I can start painting those areas if I wanted to by holding down Control and then click and painting with my mask. And I may want to actually turn symmetry on. Right now it's on the wrong direction, so I'm not going to turn it on. I'm just going to hope and pray, because it's not actually symmetrical on the this part here. But that's good for that. Okay, so I've masked out the blade. I need that as its own polygroup. So I'm going to create a new polygroup under your polygroups menu here, and I'm going to create a new one from masking. Okay. Well, actually, first let me show you what it looks like before you mask it, or before you actually polygroup it. Everything is one uniform color with this poly F poly frame setting here, if I do a new from masking, notice that it now changes colors depending on which poly group you have created. So right here, I masked out the blade. It's now this blue color, and the rest of the thing here is this burgundy, red, whatever brown color. Now to actually isolate an actual group is Control and Shift, and that will isolate a poly group from each other. Holding down Shift and clicking again, we'll kind of cycle through the next one, or select the inverse. So I would just continue to do this, holding down Control and clicking. Actually, it'd be much easier to do that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and then I'm actually going to get this one too. And then, again, I'm being a little imprecise right now, just for purposes of demonstration. And if I need to remove part of the mask, Control and Alt. There we go. That eats away the mask.
I remember all the masks.
Yeah. So masks are very useful in ZBrush for multiple reasons. Mm-hmm. All right. And then got the bottom here. Control minus. Okay. All right. Roughly that. Okay. So I'm going to again now from masking do that again. There we go. So now I have more sections, and I need to now isolate this group, mask these faces out. That's going to be hard to see. Okay. There we go. So now I'm able to mask this away. Okay. All right. Now we create a new poly group from this masking. And now we have everything properly masked out-ish. Is that the right color? Yeah, okay, good. It is all separated out how I need to. My metal is one group, my wrapping is one, my wood is another, and then I have the pommel at the end. So,
I kind of wish the cloth and the wood weren't so close together in color.
yeah,
Kind of confusing.
but unfortunately ZBrush kind of automatically generates the look of the poly groups whenever you create a new poly group. So I'm going to export this. Now normally I did show you guys in ZBrush, this one here, which is already colored in ZBrush. I have had zero luck getting this to properly export the poly paint colors from ZBrush. So what you have to do is bring it into Maya. If you're able to figure out a way to do it directly from ZBrush, good for you. It doesn't work for me. So what I did was I exported this as a high poly geometry, and I call this, I'll say, demo. All right, we're gonna import this guy in. File, import, Runglaive, high poly, demo. Okay. Uh-oh. Well, that's okay. I don't know why it's separated out that much further. That's not good. Ew. Oh, well, hold on. Well, what you would probably do is mesh combine and then keep mesh combining as needed. So I would select this stuff, mesh combine. Okay. Hold down shift, select the other stuff you need. Hold down control. Okay. Alright. Mesh combine. Okay, there we go. I have the entire blade now. Mesh combine. Mesh combine. Mesh combine, and then mesh combine. Okay. Oops, I grabbed a face up here. Undo. Mesh combine. Okay. Not 100% perfect, but you kind of get the idea. I don't know why it split it up that much. It shouldn't have. But once you're done, it is ready to start adding materials to it. So you would create just simple Lambert materials with very bright color values. So something like this. So I just created a red Lambert, blue Lambert, a green Lambert, very bright color values, because I want them further away from each other as possible on the color wheel to make it much easier to select in Substance Painter. Yes? You could, but this way it should be easier technically. I don't know why it's like a few extra steps than usual. If you wanted to, you actually could generate this yourself based on the UVs, but you have a lot of different objects, or like a lot of small components if you're doing like a, industrial model with a lot of bolts and just kind of automatic mapped components, which you shouldn't do. But in case you do, it'd be kind of a pain in the butt to deal with that. So what we do is we're going to bake this down from the high poly version that we're going to export from here, and then bake that color ID map down. Okay. Luckily, I've already generated this for you, so you don't have to do all this extra stuff. But that's kind of the process of how I might generate that high poly with color maps on it, with materials on it. You would select your object, file, export selection as an OBJ or an FBX, and then bring it back into Substance Painter. Now we're finally back into Substance Painter. What I want to do is bake my textures. In my texture set settings, I want to bake textures. This is the fun part. Or a fun part. Everything's fun in Substance Painter. Okay, so my common parameters will be in yellow. I would want to change my output size. I want to match my document resolution. It's fine. But just put it at 2048. I'm going to set my high poly parameters. So this is where you actually load in your high definition meshes or your high poly geometry. And this is where you'll load in your Runglaive mesh _ high poly. The texture set settings, yours is going to be in the bottom right over here. But texture set settings, bake textures. Yep, there you go. So you need the Runglaive mesh _ high poly. Okay. So, looking at that now, we have several different options here. So we have our normal map, which we know what a normal map is. We have a world space normal, which is a world space normal is a more accurate normal map, but it's usually only used for static geometry. But we can still generate it, it's fine, it's not going to hurt anything. Our ID map is going to be our color ID map, so let's click on that and change one parameter on it. So right now it's looking for vertex color, and this is where if we exported from ZBrush and if it can contain that polypaint information, this is where that would come into play, because polypaint are the actual vertex colors. However, we exported from Maya with different materials on it, and that's how it's retaining the information, and therefore we need to change the color source from vertex color down to material color. So that's what it needs to be. For this to work on this particular geometry, change it to material color in your ID. All right. Everybody good so far? What's up, Bruce? You stuck? Yeah. All right. Okay. So after that, we have ambient occlusion. Again, just baking down our shadow information or self-shadowing. We have what's called a curvature map. This is going to be really important. So curvature map is finding the edges along our model, our 3D model, to actually generate information along those edges. You'll see soon. Edge stuff. Position map, we're just going to generate that as well on the surface of the mesh. We're going to turn off thickness. Thickness, I believe, has to do something with subsurface scattering, like skin or wax. Let's ignore that for now. Let's turn that off. But everything else we can leave on. And then once we're done, we can hit this button here in the bottom right called Bake Lambert 1 Textures. Click on that and watch it go. Ooh, ah. Yeah. All right, so as you can see, if you look in your texture set settings, it has generated all of those maps for you. And notice what your color ID looks like. If you click on something, you can actually look and see how stuff is blending together. So, ambient occlusion map, color ID map, curvature map, which is a grayscale map with highlighted edges. The white sections are like finding along the edges, major extremes and change in direction. Our normal map, this is a position map. Where's our world space normal? This one. World space normal, again, is a more extreme normal map with broader colors in the XYZ RGB values. Very useful for stuff that is non-deforming, such as, like a weapon or a rock on the ground or anything like that. For a character, it will not be the ideal solution. Anyway. All right, so I want to actually start coloring this thing. I'm tired of looking at maps and baking maps, right? Cool. So we can fill in a color if we wanted to, or add a fill layer. And we can fill it in with our own color value if we wanted to, and change other components of it. So on the upper portion here, we have add a fill layer. It's a spill bucket icon. So add a fill layer, and you can change things such as the color, the height, the roughness value of it overall over the entire layer.
What's the difference between adding a fill layer and adding a fill sublayer? When I right click on my layer box, there's an an option that says add fill, but it doesn't add a fill layer. It adds a fill sublayer to layer 1.
Did you right click over this and
I
add?
don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I clicked on the inky gray, and then it still did it, but it still creates it as a sublayer.
Oh yeah, no, don't do that. Don't do that right now.
What is that?
That's part of your extra layer components that you can do. I'll be getting to that in a second, actually, in a couple minutes. So, all right. So, just for purposes of this demonstration, we're just gonna try to fill it in. Let's say this is the metal, okay? So let's say this is a kind of gray color with a low roughness amount. It is a metallic surface. Or actually, we might turn up our roughness a little bit. There we go. All right. So I just used on my fill layer. Metallic all the way up, roughness a little bit up. So I can paint directly onto the surface. I can paint, let's see. Or actually, no, I can't paint directly on the surface because this is a fill layer. Fill layers are different from paint layers. This is filling in the entire layer with a color-specific set of values. Okay. So in this case, it's kind of a generic base color with generic height, roughness, metallic, and normal information. But let's say I don't want, or let's say, let's just make one for the kind of rest of the thing. Let's just make another fill layer. And let's say this is cloth, quote unquote. Kind of a red cloth. Therefore, the roughness is going to be all the way up. The metallic is off. So I can turn off and on that specific layer. Okay. Now, my problem is there's no metal. There's no, our shiny metal, it's not there. We need to reveal it. So what I'm going to try to do is I can right click over a layer and I can add a black or white mask. So in this case, let's add a black mask. And notice how everything has disappeared. So you guys remember masking in Photoshop, right? So on a layer, you can add a mask, which is inherently like a black value, which means it's hiding stuff away from that layer. You mind stepping back, Keith, or just like sitting at least? Make me nervous sit. So adding a black mask will make all of this stuff disappear. All that layer completely disappear, and we're going to add in values back in by painting in a value of white to reveal that parts of that mask. So if you just try to paint on it now, it's not going to do anything, or it shouldn't. It shouldn't. Actually, it did. Typically, what you want to do is right-click and add paint down here. So these are specific to layers that you have in Substance, or in this case, a mask. So I want to add a paint component to this layer. So once I do that, right-click, add paint, I can then paint a grayscale value. Notice that you have your grayscale value here from 0 to 1, from our black to white. If I paint in a value of 1, it then reveals my stuff underneath.
Are you dragging the brush over thing and I can see the white appearing? Oh, it's because I added it to the metal map, not the
Yeah. So I just sort of painted on where this here. Now notice that I painted outside the lines, so to speak, right? I don't want to do that. That's not good. That's not good. It's not a good workflow. So what I can do is I can actually define my brush or define areas that I only want to paint on. So right now it's painting on some like just 3D space. It's painting directly in the mesh based on poly paint counts. I can paint per polygon. So to do that is an option somewhere up here, polygon fill. So oh, by the way, if I first, before I do polygon fill, to swap between the colors, like if I accidentally paint on this, I can hit X to switch quickly default to a negative value or the black eye color on my mask to just paint that back out if I wanted to. So I could try getting it a little bit closer that way. I can use my bracket keys to increase or decrease my size. Try to get as close as possible, but I run the risk of eating away at stuff. Or you can just slide it back and forth here. X. It's the same as it is in Photoshop. You'll notice that a lot of the shortcuts are the same as in Photoshop. It's kind of this weird hybrid of Photoshop and Maya put together. They had a beautiful baby named Substance. But again, the problem being that it's cutting into my geometry over here. It's not very useful for getting a very clean thing. Now, I'm showing you the wrong way first, so that way I can show you the cool stuff later. I'm just showing you the functionality of this.
How do we turn on polygon paint again?
So to turn on polygon paint, it's this box up here with a little red arrow pointing inside that box. So you click on that, and it allows you to paint only on certain polygons. So it kind of gives you a wireframe over your entire geometry that you can then set your color, set your polygon fill or mesh fill or triangle fill. So right now it's set to mesh fill, and if I click on it, I can fill in with that single color value wherever I draw a box. It'll actually fill in those particular faces. So it's very useful if you're trying to paint on per polygon instead of per just this arbitrary value sitting in space. So I'm going to hit X and fill these guys in and get a nice clean edge between the wood and the metal. Huh? For now. I'm going to have you guys delete these layers anyway. Okay. Once you're done with that, you can go back to your brush mode, your paint mode. It's the upper left. You should probably never ever have a need to use the eraser, but they have an eraser tool. They have a clone tool, smudge tool. Honestly, I don't use much of this stuff. So, cool. So we have an idea of kind of how this stuff works. So, main idea behind, main principle behind using Substance Painter is that you have a layer, bless you, that is filled with a color or a material or anything, and then you have to mask out areas that you want to reveal it on.
Making so much more sense.
So, again, it's like a fill. You're dipping your entire object in a giant vat of paint coming out. It's full of that paint. Okay, well, if you wanted to some areas to not have that paint on it, you mask it out as if you were actually painting, like, you know, painting along the ceiling here, right? You actually mask it out with masking tape or put a piece of paper over it. You dip it in. Now you have a square that's missing from that dipped object. That's the principle behind it. All right, so to not get attached, let's delete these layers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now Donald's going to show us the right way.
So I'll show you guys the right way to do it. You guys got a hint of it last few weeks ago. So one of the nice things about Substance Painter that it comes with a lot of default materials that you can use to generate kind of your default values or what it's supposed to look like on the front end. Now, if you go in your shelf down from alphas into your materials, not smart materials, just go to normal materials first. You can see you have a variety of things to choose from. So let's look at, I think there's one called Steel Rough. That's a pretty good one to start off with. We'll do that one and drag it in. You just click on the material and drag it into your layer stack. Ooh, ah.
If you double click on it, it fills the nearest, it fills any empty fill layer.
Yeah, I usually like to click and drag so it's not actually changing another layer. That's my personal workflow. So we now have a much better looking start to our metal, where we actually can change the amount of steel roughness on the fly if we wanted to. I'm going to turn it back down because it looks cooler this way. That's the most important thing, right? It looks cool. Of course. But let's say I want this to exist in its own group, right? I want to stay organized. So I'm going to define certain, like, okay, so the blade, I want this to exist by itself. Okay? So I'm going to put it in its own group. So I'm going to create a folder for the group, and I'm going to click and drag this steel rough layer into its own folder. I'm going to make further adjustments. It's not a one and done thing. I'm going to keep making adjustments to this, but for now I want to keep it all organized into a group. So in that group, I can rename the folder and call this Blade. And you can easily turn that on or off and see. So you may be inclined. So Donald, we can right click and add a black mask and paint all that stuff out, right? Nope. I can use one of these maps to actually isolate and mask out just that blade. If we right click, and instead of adding a black mask or white mask or even a bitmap maps, we're going to add a mask with color selection. And you wondered why this Rainbow Skittle Vomit color ID map was so important, right? Add a mask with color selection. It adds a black mask on your entire object, but notice that it pulls in your ID mask up here. So you can actually sample a color or eyedropper color to choose, click on it, and it highlights everything as multiple colors in your 2D and your 3D view. If I click on the red, it'll isolate the blade only to that one portion of our.
Yeah, can you explain how you actually pull that information into your layers again?
So, if I Control Z, the way that you have to do it is right click on the group. I would do it on a group. You can also do it on a per layer basis, but I like to say organized again, put stuff into groups. Right click over the group, add a mask with color selection. There it is. Add a mask with color selection. It's pulling in that ID mask that we baked down from our high poly version of it that had those colors on it.
It didn't pull anything for me.
If it didn't pull anything for you, that means you did not properly generate your ID mask, your ID texture. So do you have something in your texture set settings with ID into it?
Yes. It just hasn't appeared yet, but that's the next step.
Oh. Oh, okay, okay. So it did generate properly. Okay. So where you have colors down here, you pick a color. And then you choose whichever color you want to kind of isolate. You can also add more colors to this if you wanted this and the bottom, actually. So if I choose this, the red, it's going to add it only to areas that are red. But I can also add a selection to this. So what's another thing that's metal in this thing? The pommel. Yeah. The Pomeranian.
The pommel ring.
Okay, yeah.
Come on, guys.
Yes, the Pomeranian kilt of our ancestors. We're going to choose, and we can add another color if you choose the pick color option again and choose that purple. And it'll add that color here. And it'll add that material to that. Or add that selection. And notice our mask icon. If we actually hold down Alt and click on our mask, we can actually view that mask. Like in Photoshop, same idea. It's actually the same shortcut as in Photoshop, and now I don't know how to. Okay, there we go. So you can kind of see what the mask is doing now. It's, again, black and covering up the areas that are the wrapping and the wood, and white to reveal the blade and the pommel. Cool. So, with that, now we can actually start playing around with this and get a little bit more kind of texture to it, or a little bit more of our own, some more life to it. So I might see if the steel rust and wear actually will look good, because I want this shiny portion to be I want this to be only the blade and like the highlighted areas, or like the kind of edge of wear in between, kind of like your knit, like punching away at it, or there's like nicks in it. So I want to use a different material to kind of generate on the flat portion of it, as if it had like a layer of paint or like another layer of coat on it. So what I'm going to do is add, let's see, steel rust and wear it. I just want to see if this works first. So I'm going to do this, and I'm going to change up the color noisiness, change up the metal roughness, be a little bit more rough. There we go. So something like this. But again, the problem comes in where I have lost that kind of shiny metal. So it just kind of looks flat. It's no longer pretty. No longer shiny. Sad. So let's go ahead and add that steel rust and wear on as another layer on top of our steel rough. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a mask inside of a mask. Crazy. So on this layer itself that you've created, this new steel, rust, and wear layer. Maybe it looks using some crunch.
So,
Yes.
the only things that are in this right now are the color selection, the steel rough, and the brush layer.
Or the kind of flatter, duller metal, and the shinier metal as a layer underneath it, and then they're both within a folder called Blade that you then have the color ID selection on that folder.
Which is the second layer you made over the steel layer? Is that a handmade layer for just like a color map? Or did you actually pull a material to make that second thing?
Oh, the new one that I have selected right now. That's steel, rust, and wear. I could make my own if I wanted to.
Right.
Um,
Found it.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, so I got lost.
How lost are you?
Color selector, where am I?
Okay. So again, go up to your folder.
Got it.
All right. Right click. Add a mask with color selection.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Make sure you select your color selection here. And then you can pick a color. And it should highlight most of your object in very bright colors like red, green, blue. If it did not, then something went wrong.
I mean, it did, but I already had that. I was still about to get where you were from here.
Okay. So in that folder, you dragged in steel rough as one layer, and you dragged in steel, rust, and wear as another layer. Okay. Cool. All right. So I want to reveal this stuff along the edge and kind of in the grooves, but I don't want to paint it. I'm lazy. I don't want to do all that. I'm going to generate it. I'm going to right click on my steel, rust, and wear. I'm going to add a black mask on this layer. The black mask will hide everything from that layer, but what I can then do is right click again on this mask and create what's called a generator. A generator will be calculated based on that curvature map. So this is very important why you have a normal map, why you have all these other maps baked in. So this is where generator comes into play. So at the very bottom, it's called add generator. So add generator, if you right click over it, add generator. Not paint, generator. Now I'm going to try to use one that you guys have. So what I was trying to check with Dana is that you can actually download generators from kind of the Substance Share website. And you can load them into your own scene, your own project, and work on them from there. The older versions of Substance had a lot more options. For some reason, they hid it away on the Substance Share store. So I'm going to attempt to do this with what you guys have. So if I click on this generator and try to use, do you guys actually have metal edgeware?
Yeah.
Do metal edgeware.
It's a little pixely.
So by default, it won't look that great.
Yeah.
Right. So first what I want to do with this is, we'll see if invert works. Yes. So what I want to do first is invert it. So right now it's doing the opposite of what I want it to do. I want this layer to be filled the opposite way. So right now it's using the edges here, the edgeware, for this layer itself. So you may have to like push and pull depending on which layers are over each other, and playing around with like inverting a mask or inverting your selection. So you have an option for your metal edgeware to invert, turn it on, and it should be more accurate to a better starting off point. So it's finding edges along our curvature map and fixing some of that metal edge wear based on the normal map information. So then you can start playing around with stuff like triplanar. Well, we'll get to triplanar a little bit later, whenever we actually see something that actually repeats. But we can turn on grunge amount, turn it up or down. Our wear level, we can turn it up or down. Our wear contrast. Edge smoothness, grunge scale, grunge amount.
Ambient occlusion mapping does something weird.
And yours?
Well, whenever everything from 0 to 99 does nothing, and then when you hit 1, it disappears.
Where do you see your ambient occlusion, man?
It's part of the parameters under MG metal edge width. It's called ambient occlusion masking. And if you drag that slider all the way up to 1, all of it disappears. And if you go to 99 or lower, it does nothing.
Oh yeah. Okay. I wasn't even messing with that. My bad.
I'm just
Yeah. You can. Yeah, you can experiment with some of the stuff and have like curvature weight. Because curvature is what's actually primarily controlling this. So if you turn that down, it'll disappear. But again, looks pretty good. But my problem is we're not getting the actual edge of the blade in. How we do, right? How do. So the way that we do that is now is where we actually add a paint generator, paint attribute to this layer, where we can actually paint that stuff in. And we could paint it just using our normal paintbrush or using that polygon paint tool. So right click over this mask again, add a paint, and now we can paint in this here. And if you need to, make sure that it's painting on both sides. Actually, this blade part will paint on both sides, no problem. Just painting it in. Paint it in. If you, whoops, 1 second. Make sure that you right click over your mask and add a paint to this. So you should have, yours should have a generator on this layer as well as a paint on this.
The mask for the entire.
The mask for this
The
one.
mask for the folder or the mask for the.
No, not for the folder, just for this layer.
Okay.
We might have accidentally changed the folder. Okay, so if you want to kind of further play around with this, what you can do is if you want to add a few more notches and stuff on your own, you can actually change your alpha. Right now it's default to shape. You can actually click on it and change to a totally different alpha brush if you wanted to. So I'm going to paint in a McDonald's symbol, which you can actually load in your own. Well, it would be there. There we go. McDonald's symbol. You actually can load in your own alphas if you drag it into like an actual PSD file, black and white map. But I'm not gonna do the McDonald's logo. I'm actually gonna try to do like maybe a dirt and some dirt speckles here and there.
Change the color of the dirt.
All right. Okay. So, don't be afraid. Raise your hands if you're stuck right now. What the hell did?
I messed up somewhere.
Okay. Before you guys do that, let me show you how I would do it, and then I'll let you guys just kind of play around for the rest of the half hour once I finish doing it. So, right now I've created my blade, my metal color, so to speak, or my metal sections and components. So again, I have two more major areas I need to finish. So the wrapping, the cloth wrapping, as well as the wood. So I'm going to think of this now as its own finished material that I can use on across multiple things. So this is what I can save it out as, is a smart material. So a smart material is simply a material that is comprised of multiple layers inside of a group, inside of a folder. So if I wanted to save this for later, what I can do is, if I look at my smart materials, you'll see here that you have a lot to choose from as well. But I'm going to go ahead and right click over my blade and save as, or create smart material. So it's under your options here for that entire group, you can right click and create a smart material. And what that'll do, it'll call it based off of what you named it as. So right now, mine's named as blade. So I'm just going to turn this layer off, just so you can see. And I can just click and drag this smart material into my stack. Voila. It has created those same layers that I did before. All of my information's still there, but it's saved now in my shelf. I can use it on multiple projects. So if I really like this and I have multiple like weapons that I'm trying to make, if I have multiple components, I can save that smart material to use later.
And you just right click and hit save smart material, right?
Yes, on the group.
And then it just goes to blade.
Yeah, it just defaults to whatever you have named that thing in your as your group. I'm just going to go ahead and remove mine from my smart material list. I don't actually want to save it. Delete. There we go. All right. Don't delete any of the default ones if you can help it, because that'll be very tough to fix later. So once I do that, I can now that you know what a smart material is, then I can allow you to use smart materials. So now I'm going to try to generate my wood, the wood color on this, or wood texture over this. So if I scroll down under my smart materials, I have several different wood options. So I have a wood beech veined, wood chest, and then wood chest stylized, and wood walnut. If you look in your normal materials, you only have like one wood, like American cherry. That's not very useful because this is like an older, rougher wood. So these smart materials give you more options to play with. So I'm actually going to use wood chest, I guess. Yeah, that seems like the best option here. And again, by default, it will do it over this entire object. And you notice that it's also going in the wrong direction. Your wood grain, or some of your wood grain, is actually going the wrong direction. So I'm going to have to fix all of that stuff to be more accurate. So just before I even mask it out, I'm just going to fix the wood grain first and make it more easily visible. So if you expand out your layer for wood chest stylized, you notice they have a lot more layers to choose from. You have wood fibers, you have a grunge pass with its own levels and diffuse with base color, all this other stuff happening. It's pretty cool. You can just turn off and off stuff and see how it is they actually generated this. They have a sharpened filter. They have the wood fibers themselves. and then the base color. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go to my wood fibers, and if you notice that you get properties in the top right for fill, you notice that you have stuff like UV scaling and UV rotation. So if I try to scale it up or down, it changes the overall tiling of it.
That's weird.
I'm going to undo. And also change the overall rotation. Yeah, it does look animated. So you could try to fix it this way, but notice that not everything is perfectly aligned up and down, left and right. I have the actual wood part of this here, the actual like pole, vertical, but I have like this part here rotated. Right now it's set to projection mode, is set to UV projection. However, that's basing it off of our actual UV shells and our UV orientation. So based on the 2D view. But what if I told you can base it on a 3D view? If you can actually fix a lot of those problems that you would have with those seams and make it sort of seamless. That you would change the type of projection mode to something called triplanar projection. So triplanar projection will change the directions in a more uniform fashion around the entire 3D model that you can then rotate to your heart's content if you wanted to. Like let's say rotate it back down to 90 degrees. Or 0 degrees, sorry. Well, let's make this one 80.
So we're going to mask that like we did the other material?
Yes, we will.
So we know what we're doing. Jump ahead and finish that real quick.
Yeah, pretty much. So, and again, to mask this out, again, I only want the wood areas. I'm going to right-click over the group itself, add a mask with color selection, choose a color, and I'm going to add that very bright green for the wood areas.
And then, so for the wood areas, we're just making a regular material, bringing it into a new folder, and then masking it out.
You're bringing in a smart material.
So it's,
Smart material is right underneath materials.
yeah.
It's a smart material is essentially just a group of layers. It's
Well,
yeah.
I'm just asking for the steps. The steps are bring smart material into folder,
Yes.
mask smart material, essentially.
Yes. Yes.
And which of the woods do you use?
I used the stylized chest, I think. You can also change the overall color of it if you dig far enough in. I want to make it maybe a little bit brighter. Or a little bit grayer, let's say. Desaturate a little bit. It's too bright and happy for my video game.
It needs to be military shooter.
Yes. And then one more thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just finish this off by adding the fabric. So under my materials, I'm going to add fabric rough 2. And don't worry if you're behind, I will give you guys time to work on it. I'll come around and start helping you out. So I'm just finishing it for the demonstration. I'm bringing in the fabric rough 2 as its own layer again. It's over the entire thing this time. And again, I'm going to create a new group. Call this fabric put that layer into that folder, and then color ID mask this group, or color mask with color selection, sorry. Choose a color, and then choose that bright blue. Now, it's a little difficult with the colors that I've chosen to actually see this. I'm going to select my fabric, and again, making sure that right now it's set to UV projection. I'm just going to go ahead and change it over to triplanar and see what that looks like. I like the look of it, but it is repeating. It is not repeated enough, so I'm going to change my UV scale, change my overall repetition on this. And then what I may want to do now is to change the actual color of this. I could try to change the color, but I do like this as a base color. For, let's say, if this was worn down, right? It's worn along the edges, and I want to make a new layer that only affects like the interior parts. Let's.
I'm noticing some really weird stuff on with the pommel. I don't know if you're having it too, but there's like the wood textures extending onto like
Yes.
arbitrary areas.
So after we do this, I can actually go in and show you how to fix that. You would actually change that in the your mask. So I'm going to change this back to my shape, actually. There we go, shape. What you could do is do that polygon selection tool and paint on.
It's not. They're not attached to polygons actually. They're just arbitrary areas. I thought they were polygons at first.
No, it's because it's multiple areas bleeding into each other. So I have to like paint into this one and then also paint into this part here.
Can you just put like the steel layer above it? Would that help?
Oh, let me add a paint on this. There we go. That should do it. Is that not? Oh, I have to make sure it's on this layer as well. Add paint.
Also, I can't.
There we go.
Change the orientation of my whip ring.
That's gonna be. Yeah, there we go.
I forgot to open the folder. I was just putting on the whole folder.
Okay. That's how I would fix that issue. And then I think there's like one other one that I have to fix, but we'll come back to that later. But first I want to get through this. So let's go back to my fabric. I'm going to add just a normal fill layer. Not a material, not anything else. I'm just going to add a fill layer in this layer stack. And it defaults to this white value. I want to change it to that burgundy color, so I'll kind of choose this thing. But I don't want... Yeah, right, it's all glossy. It's like this, you know, it's dipped paint. Like, that's not what I need, right? So what I can do is I can turn off channels that I don't want. I only want color information from this layer. So let's turn off our height, rough, metal, and normal, and only leave color on right here. So right under the word material, turn off these other channels. So it's only pulling in color information. Yeah, but this is where my generator can help us out and help generate like those worn edges, and I can actually set layers like multiply over this whole thing if I wanted to, but I'm not going to worry about that. But what I'm going to do now is add a black mask to this layer, add a generator, right click, add a generator, and I'm trying to, which ones do you guys have for edge, whatever? For your generators. Who's on a generator right now?
Fiber.
Not fiber. I need like an edge.
Did you just make a color fill layer, or did you use the smart material?
I used a color fill layer and I turned off every channel but color. I have edgeware here, but that's not helpful to you guys. Let's see what Mask Builder is. Okay, so Mask Builder is kind of like a catch-all thing that you can create, that you can then set certain attributes and actually load in your own maps if you wanted to. Image inputs, custom grunge maps you can import, but it will kind of auto-generate a mask that's pretty decent to start off with. You just may want to adjust certain attributes for it. So like the grunge amount, the grunge scale. Secondary grunge, it's a little too intense. And then you can just further adjust this if you wanted to. Let's say I want to change the overall contrast or make it blend a little bit better. You can right-click over this fill layer and add a levels to this. So like a levels in Photoshop. You can change how much it eats away into that mask. So it's adjusting the levels of that mask. There we go. So I'm going to be walking around and I'm going to help you guys out if you got stuck or lost at any point, and we'll go from there.